Joe Anderson and Al Clopine of Pure Financial Advisors have the answers to your retirement plan. This is your money, your wealth.
Hope is not a strategy. Many of you are hoping for a successful retirement. It's time to stop hoping and start planning. If you take a look at the statistics, I read an article from CNBC, and it stated this: 40% of you baby boomers have zero money saved. Zero. 40% of baby boomers do not have anything saved. It's this hope strategy. Stop hoping, start planning. We have a great show lined up for you today. We're going to talk about strategies so you don't become one of the statistics. We got Big Al Clopine sitting right over there. My name's Joe Anderson. I am a certified financial planner, president of Pure Financial Advisors. We also got Mr. Matt Horsley coming on board a little bit later. So when you think about it, if I want to retire, you have to put strategies in place. If that statistic doesn't wake you up, I don't know what is. This show is a wake-up call to make sure that you can prepare for your retirement. That's what's on my mind today. For some of you, that's what we got to do to wake you up, to make sure that you are prepared for retirement. Hopefully it doesn't go to that extreme. But there's three things that you have to consider if you are in retirement or close to. Here's what the studies show: that a lot of you are not necessarily prepared. You haven't saved enough. Secondly, you don't know how to coordinate everything when it comes to taxes, inflation, healthcare, and everything else. And then when it comes time to when you are in retirement, everything that you learned is probably wrong. So that's what we want to get into today. To help me out, let's bring in the big man, Big Al Clopine. Big Al, what do you think? It's a wake-up call, man. People have to wake up and start planning for their overall retirement, or what are they going to do?
Well, they do, Joe, and that's why I'm actually real excited about this show today, because there's some things you got to get done to get your retirement on track, to wake up. And we know this is true. There are some factors right now that are making this much more difficult. Like, for example, very low interest rates. It's hard to create good fixed income with the low interest rates, and increased longevity, which is great. So we're living longer, which I really like, but that means our money has to last that much longer. How about healthcare? We know that healthcare is growing. The costs are growing a lot more than regular inflation. And market volatility, boy, if this one doesn't scare you, if interest rates are at all-time lows, the market is at all-time highs. Where do you place your investments right now? And then finally, the national debt. We've just reached $18 trillion of national debt. And what is that going to mean? It's going to mean probably your taxes are going to go up. And if you just take a look at a little graph over time, we're at that $18 trillion level now, actually a little bit above that. And the problem is, how do we get this paid off? Well, we can reduce government spending, which is difficult to say the least, or we can increase taxes, and it's probably going to be a combination of both. But Joe, it's these factors to why people really need to kind of change how they think about retirement.
Yeah, it's a little doom and gloom for this early in the morning, isn't it?
It is, but you got to wake people up, right?
There's a lot of things that people got to consider, because retiring today is very challenging. There's a lot of things that you have to take a look at. So let's dive in. Let's start helping you out. What are some things that you want to make sure that you consider when you start constructing your overall financial plan? And the first thing is it's spending, Al.
Yeah, I would say that's true. And so take a look at what you're spending money on and break it into three categories. I would say necessities, wants, and wishes. Necessities, these are expenses that you have to have. You have shelter, you have utilities, food, water, and the like. Now, then you get into some of your wants. So I want to go on vacation, things like that sort. I want to get a new car. And then there's the wishes. This is kind of like the bucket list. It's that once-in-a-lifetime vacation, or whatever it is for you, you want to be able to plan for that. But a lot of times, Joe, people think that expenses are all, we got to spend all three, and that's not necessarily true. Necessities, yes, but everything else is if you can.
Right, if they can categorize it a little bit, then they can put things through the asset test to see what's really important to me and my family, to make sure that you can do all the things that you want to do. And if they do, just spend a little bit more time on where the money is going. I would say one of the biggest mistakes that people make when they approach retirement is that they underestimate how much that they're spending. They don't necessarily take the time. And no one wants to be put on a budget. We're not saying that. But if you can categorize things a little bit more tightly, I guess, for lack of a better word, you're going to be be more successful. Then you have to take a look at the income stream. Okay, so here's my spending, I categorize it. Now I have to take a look at what's going to come in as an income.
Yeah, and there you want to look at your fixed income sources in retirement, like Social Security, like pensions. Maybe you've got real estate income and the like. And then take a look at your liquid investments. And a quick rule of thumb is take your liquid investments, multiply it by 4%, and that would be your approximate withdrawal rate. So in other words, that's approximately what you could spend from your assets on an ongoing basis. Now, that's an oversimplification. Some of you it may be 2.5%, some may be 5%. It depends upon a lot of factors, but at least start there. And Joe, we talk about these rules of thumb, and what it really means is something that probably doesn't work for anybody, but at least it gives you a starting point.
Right. I mean, I think a lot of times people don't really understand, all right, well, how much income can I produce from the investments that I saved? So if you look at a simple rule of 4%, if you have $100,000 saved, just understand that you probably don't want to take out any more than $4,000 out of the portfolio. As I just mentioned, 40% of individuals have zero saved. The same study said, all right, well, if I go to 60%, the average is $100,000. That's $4,000 per year of income. That's not nearly enough to maintain a lifestyle, in my opinion, here in Southern California. So you have to do some planning. Look at where your money's going. Make sure that you tighten up the belt a little bit, and then plan for a successful retirement. Stop hoping for it, start planning for it. All right, we got to take a break. When we get back, we're going to bring in Mr. Matt Horsley to break things down for us, to talk a little bit about what's the biggest obstacle people face when it comes to a successful retirement. It might be something different than you think, so don't go anywhere. The show's called Your Money, Your Wealth.
Hi, I'm Mike Bernier, Certified Financial Planner with Pure Financial Advisors. And did you know that it's estimated that more than half the American households will not have enough money saved to live the same lifestyle in retirement as they did before retirement, even if they work until age 65? That's according to the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College.
Hey, welcome back to the show. The show's called Your Money, Your Wealth. We're talking about a financial wake-up call. I don't know what that was. Was that a dog waking
That's a
you
dog.
up?
That is a true wake-up call right
yes,
there, Jeff.
Yes, I don't want to be waking up like that, ever, ever again. But what we want to get into is just waking up, because the stats out there are telling you that a lot of you are not necessarily waking up to your overall financial picture. Stick around for this segment. We got Matt Horsley coming on board. We're going to talk to him about some investing ideas. But before we do that, let's go to the true-false question.
Since I'm 72 and still working full-time and contributing to my company 401k, I don't have to take a required distribution from my 401k. And the answer to that actually is true, and this is sort of contrary to popular belief, because here's the rule that many of you know. At age 70 and a half, you have to take money out of your IRA. That's called a required minimum distribution. But if you are working at a job, then your 401k, you don't have to take that required distribution until after you retire, with one caveat, and that is if you own more than 5% of the company, you still have to take that required distribution. But it's a way that if you're going to work into your 70s and you don't really need to take the money out of the 401k, you don't have to.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some good planning around that too, Al. If you have old IRAs where you're trying to avoid that required distribution, potentially you could roll those IRAs into your current 401k plan, and then that would avoid all RMDs altogether, so then you don't have to have extra income on your tax return. So just a couple of different planning ideas for you. Let's get back to the spending and some examples here.
Yeah, because Joe, last segment, we talked about spending and kind of categorizing your spending in terms of some of your needs, some of your wants, and some of your real wishes or desires. And here's some real examples right here. Like, let's look at the Smiths. So we got necessities, $40,000. We got wants of $10,000 and wishes of $20,000 per year. Okay, so that's $70,000. Now let's take a look at the income. let's say the fixed income from Social Security and pensions is about $30,000, and from the investments, remember we said last segment, take your investments and multiply it by about 4% to give you a distribution rate. Now that's different from what you need to earn on those investments. You need to earn more than that, but only take out about 4% to fund your lifestyle. So here we got about $50,000 to fund a potentially $70,000 lifestyle. It's a little bit under, but it's not bad. It's not bad. So in this case, the necessities are covered, even the wants are covered, right? And the wishes, you know, we don't know. But if you got some wishes that are really important to you, maybe you kind of, some of the wants you kind of put off for a little while so that you can do some of these bigger things. So that's workable. Now what about the Jones, Mr. and Mrs. Jones? $80,000 of necessities, wants of $30,000 and wishes of $40,000, $150,000. So does that sound like you? Maybe, maybe not. How about the fixed income though? So $30,000 of fixed income, maybe $40,000 coming from investments, so it's only $70,000. So we're pretty short, right? We're $70,000 to $150,000. We can't make this work. In fact, even the $70,000 isn't even going to cover the $80,000 of necessities. So what does that tell you? This is not workable, right? So Mr. and Mrs. Jones, maybe you're going to have to work a little bit longer. Maybe one of you needs to work part-time in retirement. Maybe you need to downsize your home, a number of things, but this is not a workable solution as it stands right now. This is the example of why you need a retirement wake-up call, because you got to check these two things, spending versus available fixed income in retirement. And Joe, this is one of those things that a lot of people don't know how to do the math. It's not that complicated if you just look at your spending in terms of categories and your fixed income and see how it matches up.
Right, those are some of the first steps that you absolutely have to make, but the driving force of all of this is basically how are you investing the assets that you've saved? Or if you're still accumulating, what is the strategy that you have to put in place to make sure that you have that income come to you each and every year? To help us with this, I brought on Matt Horsley. He's a senior financial planner at Pure Financial Advisors, been in the business for 20 some odd years. And so it's a real pleasure to bring you on board, Matt. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Joe, for having me.
Hey, so let's talk about investing. So there's hundreds of different ways that you can invest your money, right? And so help our viewers out. What are some strategies, or what should they focus in on to give them the highest probability of success?
Yeah, so I think when you look at it, there literally are, I mean, there's hundreds, if not thousands of ways to invest your money, but really it comes down to two different approaches. And the first approach is what we call more of a conventional approach to investing, and it's what most of us are used to over time for the past 30, 40, 50 years. And I remember growing up as a kid, my dad over dinner answering the phone from a stockbroker trying to sell him a stock. So this is an approach that in some ways is you believe you have some ability as an investor to time the market, or to figure out which stocks to buy and sell, or when to be in small cap stocks or large cap stocks or international emerging markets, whatever it might be. So there's some crystal ball approach, and you may be listening to Jim Cramer on CNBC or reading Money Magazine or Forbes or whatever it might be to get some of your advice in that way. So compare that to what's called more of an evidence-based approach to investing, or we call an institutional approach. And what that basically says is that we believe that capital markets work, and that at any given time, the prices of securities or stocks are fair. Because there's so many people, but not just individual investors, but computer algorithms analyzing every bit of information about every stock that's publicly traded every second of every day. So to think that you or I or anybody might be smarter than the collective market really is an impossibility, and that's what the studies have shown.
So you got a traditional view, which most people are aware of, but you might look at that and call it gambling, because they're trying to predict the future, or they're trying to find the next Google or Microsoft or Facebook or whatever it is.
Right, or Tesla or Apple or whatever it might be. But I think really when you compare the two approaches, the institutional approach is a much more disciplined way to invest. And basically what that says is that what I want to do is I want to have a fully diversified portfolio, controlling all the things that I can control. And we've talked about that in the show and during the classes that we teach, and we talk to clients all the time, is control fees, control taxes, control how you diversify your portfolio, and then control how you manage that portfolio over time. So really the difference is in the conventional approach, it's almost like you're going to Vegas with your money and you're gambling, or you're going to Del Mar on the racetrack and you're betting on horses, and the potential outcomes could be gigantic.
Right. It's that hope strategy. I hope I make it big. I hope I make money in the markets this year versus expecting a certain rate of return.
Exactly. And if you control those things that you can, then you can narrow down those expected returns to come back to your financial plan that you've put together and say, okay, well, if my target rate of return is, say, 6 or 7%, if I can do that and do all the things I want to do in my lifetime, then I'm going to be in great shape.
Well, I mean, that sounds reasonable, but why don't people do it? Why don't people implement that strategy? Because you would look at the studies, I think most people still do the conventional, traditional way.
Sure. And what all the evidence says is that there's this huge gap, it's called a behavior gap, between what people should do and what they actually do. As investors. So it's a gap that might be akin or as wide from an investing standpoint or accomplishing goals as the Grand Canyon. And so basically what that says is that here's what I should be doing, but as a human being, my mind is wired to make certain decisions that might not make sense financially. And a lot of those are based upon fear and greed.
Well, I mean, there's biases too, right? If you take a look today, I think most people will say, well, the U.S. markets is the place to be because the U.S. markets have had such a huge run. So this recency bias, I think, is putting damage on someone's portfolio, so you need damage control.
No question about it. And I think that's one of the biggest disservices that sometimes the media does to investors these days. So that bias, the recency bias, says that as an investor, I'm much more concerned about what's happened over the course of the past 12, 16, 18 months than looking at my long-term goals and the long-term picture. And of course, when you do that, you might say to yourself, well, yeah, I know over time that if I have a diversified portfolio and I'm disciplined about it, then I'm going to succeed. But what most of us do as investors, we say, well, if you look at 2014, the S&P 500 was up about 13%. The Dow Jones was up 10%. But if you had a fully diversified portfolio, you might be up 3, 4, 5%. And that's because international stocks didn't do well, emerging markets, bonds didn't do great, some of the different things like that. So as an investor, you sometimes might lose your discipline and start to become a little bit more, leaning towards, well, I'm going to sell out of this stuff and then just buy into the S&P 500 because, hey, it was up 13% last year. That's recency bias.
Right, so they're just looking at the rearview mirror, what performed the best, and let's just load up on that particular asset class.
That's exactly right.
And then you got the herd mentality, too. It's just like, well, if my neighbor's doing it, if my coworker's doing it, someone that I respect, I'm going to continue to do that.
Yeah.
But let's take a look at this. So all of these biases that people have, and then they're investing their money probably not necessarily in a prudent way. What effect do you think that has on actual performance or real dollars?
Well, the numbers actually fully reflect really the catastrophic results that these mistakes can have if people aren't handling this in a disciplined way. And essentially what it states is that if you look at performance of the S&P 500 over the course of the past 20 years, it's averaged roughly 8.5%. While the individual investor has averaged closer to 4%. If you take that over a longer period of time, over 30 years, the S&P's averaged close to 11, while the individual investor has averaged closer to 7. So that's a 7% spread, and that's really the behavior gap that we're talking about that can really cause a complete collapse of your financial plan. And if you look at what does that mean from a dollar standpoint, in terms of my overall ability to create income, as an example, let's just say you invested $1 million. And you had 20 years to grow that money. At a 4% rate of return, that $1 million is going to turn into roughly 2.1 million or so, if you had the discipline to be able to do that for 20 years. At an 8% return, if you just followed the market and had a diversified portfolio, you average closer to 8.5%. That's a 4% spread. Now, you're at about 4.3 million bucks. So that difference is roughly $2 million. On that $2 million, as you and Al were talking about, how much cash flow or what's your distribution from that figure? It's roughly an $80,000 a year difference in your cash flow. Those numbers are what matters. It's your ability to create the income that you need to do all the things that you want to do, so you're not going to outlive the money that you have.
So these Dalbar studies come out, they take a look at an average mutual fund investor, and so the average rate of return of the overall markets were, 8%, while the average investor, you and I and everyone else, has done 4%. That's a 4% spread, and the reason for that is they're getting in and out of the markets at the wrong time. They're doing the hunch, hey, well, here, I have a hot stock that I think I'm going to purchase, and of course they're buying it when it's all-time highs. And so all these different things that we hear in the media are hurting the investor. And I think one of the biggest reasons why people are not successful, it's not of inflation, taxes, longevity, and all this other things. It's themselves. It's them being able to control their overall behavior when things go bad.
There's no question. We are indeed our own worst enemies when it comes to investing and accomplishing all of our goals, because we react to those chemicals that we have inside of our brain. It's a fight or flight mentality. And we saw that during the collapse, the dot-com collapse in 2000, and in 07, 08 as well, is that when markets are down, we have this tendency or this fear that we want to get out, before it goes to zero. Well, in our minds, we know long-term that's not going to happen. If you stay disciplined with your approach, then you can accomplish all of your goals. So if you're looking at things like taxes, real estate, your investments, estate planning, insurance, those are all the things that you have to take into account to make sure that you're going to be successful with your overall planning. And I think every investor should take the chance and really learn more about this. Watching the show is one thing, but then the other thing is really educating yourself. And at Pure, we teach over 7 or 8 different colleges around San Diego. I would highly encourage our viewers to come to one of those classes. Costs you a few bucks. It's 6 hours of great material. And I think that the website's purefinancial.com. You can go right to the website, sign up, and get educated.
Too bad we don't have a 3-hour show. The kid can go on and on and on and on. Great stuff, Matt. I really appreciate you coming on board. Hey, we got to take another break. When we get back, I have no idea what we're going to talk about. No, I'm kidding. We're going to get into wake-up calls of your financial future. We're going to get into your email questions. And then we're just going to wrap things up and tell you all the key points that you need to do to make sure that you have a successful retirement. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
That's cruel. That's your wake-up call.
Good morning. Top of the morning to you. Welcome back to the show. The show's called Your Money, Your Wealth. We're talking about waking you up financially. A lot of you are not necessarily prepared for your overall financial future. Now is the time to start planning. And let's start with your education. Let's go to the true false, Big Al.
When I inherit an IRA from my parents, I don't need to take a required minimum distribution until after my 70th birthday. And the answer to that is absolutely false. You actually have to take a required distribution when you inherit an IRA, beneficiary IRA, non-spousal, so the kids, grandkids. When you get that IRA from your parents or grandparents, you have to start taking a required distribution right away based upon your age. If you're 10 years old and you're going to live to age, let's say 80 per the IRS tables, whatever, then 1/70th, you got 70 years to go, will have to come out of the account. Regardless of your age, you have to start that required minimum distribution.
Yeah, and stick around, stay tuned, because there's a chance that that stretch IRA is what Al just described, might go away, where the now non-spouse beneficiaries, the kids will have to deplete the account within 5 years. So stay tuned for that new law change that could come right around the corner. We're talking about a retirement wake-up call, and there's some things that you want to make sure that you consider to wake yourself up to make sure that you can have a successful retirement. One is that you want to make sure you calculate your spending. What are your needs? What do you want? And then your wish list. And then you have to calculate your retirement income to make sure that you have enough income to cover all the spending needs. Maybe you can just cover your needs, not the wants and wishes, or maybe it's the needs and wants, whatever it is. Then you have to take a look at your investment philosophy and portfolio, because one of the biggest mistakes that you will make is that when things are good, you get in. When things are bad, you get out. You listen to your neighbors. There's a lot of different things that you have to do when it comes to your overall investment portfolio. Al, what's next on the wake-up call?
Well, Joe, I think a lot of people will find when they go through this exercise, they may be a little bit behind. So if you find you're behind, here's a few things that you can do. So number one would be cutting out some expenses, maybe some of your wants and wishes. Maybe you want to save more. I think this is true for everybody. Save more into your retirement accounts. You might want to consider downsizing your home in some cases in retirement. And then for some of you, maybe you need to work a little bit longer or work part-time in retirement. A lot of the baby boomers are working part-time in retirement, not only for the benefits of meeting with people and getting up in the morning, but also making more income. And then delaying Social Security can be a good thing because we're living longer, and the longer you delay it up to age 70, the more benefit you're going to have per month for the rest of your life.
Yeah, so I mean, some of the things that you might have thought of when you approach retirement needs to change, right? So you might have to work longer, use your house, delay Social Security, or a combination of several different things. So it's time to wake up, start some planning. Let's flip the show back to you. Let's answer some email questions, Al.
All right. Number one is from Mark in La Mesa. If I'm already contributing to a 403B and a 457 plan, can I also contribute to a Roth IRA? And the answer to that is yes, believe it or not. However, there are income limitations. And so, Mark, if you're single and you're making more than $116,000, that Roth IRA contribution starts getting phased out. And if you're married, it's $183,000.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at a Roth IRA, it depends on income. And then also make sure that you double check here too, because if you have a Roth, if you have a 403B plan, you might be able to do a Roth provision in the 403B to even put more money into a Roth. Now, I think we got time for one more.
Okay, this is, I think, from Rebecca in Carlsbad. When I retire, how will my 401k and my Roth contributions be taxed? And in terms of a 401k, in most cases, you're going to pay tax on those dollars because you got a tax deduction going in. Joe, as you just mentioned, in some cases, you got a Roth option on your 401k. So if you pull that money out, you didn't get a tax deduction, so that part is tax-free. In terms of your Roth contributions, that will all be tax-free, provided you're 59.5 when you retire, and you've waited at least 5 years for the money in the Roth IRA. So some 401k is generally fully taxable. Roth IRAs are generally going to be tax-free.
Yeah, and we would encourage you to do both, right? Tax-free income, and there's nothing better in retirement. Hey, we got to get out of here. Hopefully you enjoyed the show. I want to thank Matt Horsley for joining us. Of course, Big Al, you did a wonderful job. Next week, what we're going to talk about, if you're 20, 30, 40, 50, or 60, there's different things that you got to consider to retire. We're going to break it all out for you, so don't miss next week's show. I'm Joe Anderson. You just watched another awesome episode of Your Money, Your Wealth. Have a wonderful weekend.
Ready to start building the retirement you always dreamed of? Meet with one of Pure Financial Advisor's certified financial planners for a free assessment by calling right now. 1-888-99-GOALS. That's 1-888-99-GOALS. Or go to our website at purefinancial.com. Your retirement is within reach. We'll show you how.